ABL member or a friend of ABL, welcome. I want to thank our partners at Mundo, Boston, who are making today's event accessible by translating key messages from the conversation in Spanish on their Facebook page. We look forward to working with you and thank you for your support. Today, we are joined by Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. I am thrilled at today's event. And so, as so many of you know, Congresswoman Pressley was elected to represent the 7th Congressional District of Massachusetts in 2018. I am her constituent. She is an advocate, a policymaker, an activist, and a survivor. Her experience has shaped her commitment to creating a robust and informed policies that speak to the intersectionality of her district's lived experiences. She serves on the House Committee on Financial Services and House Committee on Oversight and Reform. We're honored to welcome her back for an ABL program. Thank you, Congresswoman. To lead today's conversation, we are thrilled to welcome ABL's Board Treasurer, JC Morales. JC is the founder and managing director of Surfside Capital Advisors, a financial advisory firm which helps businesses design and execute growth strategies. In addition to his leadership at ABL, JC was appointed by Governor Baker to serve on the board of directors of Mass Development. He is also co-founder of the Latino Legacy Fund at the Boston Foundation and the Boston chapter of the Association of Latino Professionals for America. We are grateful for his leadership on the board at ABL. Before I turn it over to JC, I have a few brief housekeeping reminders to share. This event is being recorded and will be on our website after today's event. While everyone in the audience is muted, you can submit your questions through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We want to get as many questions as possible, but we will also share all questions submitted with Representative Pressley's staff after the event. JC, I now turn it over to you and Congresswoman Pressley. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Grace.
No,
I'm on the line.
Just
so you can help me with
Congresswoman
whatever you can
Pressley,
with this live broadcast when we go on, okay?
And privilege is to be chatting with you today about
whatever little nuggets. Yeah, just little nuggets. Yeah.
You know, as we know, it was only a few weeks ago, a month ago, that Congress enacted the largest piece of legislation, economic stimulus that we've seen in the last 50 years, probably in its history, right?
Can you hear them?
I thought we could engage
Michael?
today and, what's happening on the Hill, the
Alberto.
impact that
Mute your mic.
the package has been having both on businesses and folks across our state, and maybe wrap it up around issues of equity, right? Because I think that there's a lot of things that in the process of approving the legislation, were not fully thought through relative to equity. So with that said, I'm just going to pass it out to you and first get an update from the Hill. Welcome. You are on mute.
Okay, thank you, Jen. I do that to ensure that I don't filibuster. It's to self-police myself. But thank you, Jen. Thank you, JC. Thank you, ABL. And thanks to everyone who's joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to folks about the resources that are available. And JC, you'll let me know if I'm getting too in the weeds, but the top line is that we've approved more funds. The House moved on more funds for the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, which provides small businesses with federally guaranteed loans up to $10 million in order to cover payroll and other operating expenses during this public health emergency. Now, it is first come, first serve, and resources will dry very fast. So it is important to reach out to your bank or lender as soon as possible. And just to speak to, the scale of this, these funds went live yesterday, and there were more people who applied the first day than in the entire first wave of CARES Act PPP funding in the first day. So the SBA has a lender locator on its website that can help you locate lenders participating in the program. Now, one of the things we were able to see added in the CARES Act 2 that we fought for was to diversify who the lenders are. And so community banks or CDFIs and minority depository institutions will play a larger role in this second round of funding. Now, under this program, loan payments on principal and interest will be deferred for 6 months, And small businesses will have the option to defer these payments for up to 1 year. The PPP program includes loan forgiveness of up to 8 weeks of payroll costs, mortgage interest, rent and utility costs, but it is expected that no more than 25% of the amount forgiven will be for non-payroll expenses. For businesses that are unable to immediately rehire staff, they will have until June 30th to restore full employment and salary levels. Okay, so that's on PPP, JC, and we can get more into the economic injury disaster loans and grants, expanded unemployment insurance if you'd like.
Great. So let's just stick with PPP because obviously is the headline. Between the first round and the second round, I believe we're up to 600 and something billions of dollars.
Sure.
Funds are being consumed rapidly, right? SBA website crashed yesterday, making it for a very, very rough day. I think things are up and running today. There's been 2 rounds, and at this juncture, it is anticipated that somewhere in the neighborhood of only 10 to 15% of businesses are going to actually get something, right? Is it likely to be future rounds? What's the climate on the Hill relative to when these funds get exhausted, which is likely to be this week?
Well, this pandemic, the coronavirus, is unprecedented in every way. We're ostensibly dealing with a crisis within a crisis, so a public health crisis along with an economic crisis. And the scale of this hurt is unprecedented. And it is very challenging to effectively meet the scale and scope of the hurt. If you think about the fact that in this last CARES Act package, the second round, we allocated $310 billion for payroll protection for the payroll protection program PPP, and $60 billion for economic injury disaster loans EIDL. And the fact that we know that that's going to dry up and quickly does speak to the depth and how wide-ranging the hurt is. And so I believe there will at least be a fourth package. This one is supposed to focus on infrastructure and economic recovery. I'll certainly be advocating for that definition of infrastructure to be more broadly and wildly defined and expanded, and will be pushing for not only a more robust economic response, but a more equitable economic relief response, because that has not been the case. Look, we took something that was basically a PPP slush fund, and we worked hard to improve it, but it does not go far enough. And so we will need to keep coming back to the table.
Yeah, I think for our listeners today, I mean, I'm not going to assume that folks know this, so I'm going to make reference to it. The latest updates on PPP are on their SBA website, sba.gov, and treasury.gov. And if you haven't applied, there is still time to apply, but we encourage you to do that. You're encouraged to do that sooner rather than later. Congressman, if we maybe move on the issue of PPP to the issue of PTO and family first, how this is impacting our families and some of the actions that Congress have taken to protect some of those rights.
Well, Congress hasn't done enough. If you think about how we could have weathered this crisis, if we already had universal health care, if we already had universal paid family leave, universal paid sick leave, but we don't have those things. And so, as I said, there's a crisis within a crisis. That's why I did introduce legislation as a part of a suite of bills that were introduced. And we had the rollout yesterday. It's a Bill of Rights for essential workers. And in there, I introduced legislation specific to universal paid leave. And then also we're thinking about our families, because I have to look at this holistically. There's an intersectionality in all of this. A one-time rebate, a one-time direct cash assistance of $1,200. Only Secretary Mnuchin thinks that a family can live off of $1,200 for 10 weeks. That's $17 a day. He clearly does not live in the Massachusetts 7th Congressional District. And so families being eligible for those rebates, depending on your your income status will receive payments ranging from $1,200 to $2,400, and then whether or not you have children, you get additional funds. But we need reoccurring payments. So we need paid leave. We need reoccurring monthly payments. We need targeted investments more for our small businesses that are too small to fail. Not Potbellies and Shake Shack and Ruth Chris, but for beauty salons and barbershops and bodegas and restaurants. We need dedicated relief and funds for our MBEs, who we know have historically struggled to access capital. And again, they're being left behind in this. We need to cancel student debt. I know many people try to frame that as a millennial issue, but I'm 46 years old. Many of my peers still are paying that. In Massachusetts, we have 855,000 federal borrowers who are saddled with a minimum of $30,000 worth of debt. We've got to put money back in the hands of people. We have to eliminate bills. And so I'll be fighting for student debt cancellation. And then, of course, our undocumented neighbors were completely left out of every relief package. And so we see the impact of that showing up in the economic recovery, as well as when it comes to combating things like food insecurity and the like.
Great. The other day I was talking to an economist who basically suggested the U.S. GDP is about $35 trillion a year, and between the CARES Act and the Federal Reserve action, there's about $4 to $6 trillion, in liquidity being injected into the economy, which it's about 1 or 2 months of economic activity. Long way of saying or asking the following question, right? Which is, we started down this path of the crisis about a month and a half ago. And, clearly it seems like the horizon is longer than a month from now, right? Makes that economic stimulus continuation a necessary step in the next month or so. What are your thoughts on the recovery path, right? And this is a very hard question because no one knows. There's a lot of debate between politicians and scientists around when's the right time to open and where, right? The governor announced today, as a matter of fact, Governor Baker announced that they're reopening or they're extending the stay-at-home provisions until May 15th. What are your thoughts for Massachusetts in that proverbial debate of life versus livelihood?
Yeah, well, I'll just say that, it's easy for us to fall into these binary choices, families versus small business, the economy versus public health. All of these things are important. It's not or, it's and. I'm of the belief that our greatest wealth is our health, and that there is no economy if people are not alive and healthy and thriving in order to be working, in order to have purchasing power. And so I think that we have to be guided by science and not the markets. And that's why I really do commend our governor and all the mayors that I've been working with throughout the Massachusetts 7th, which includes Boston, Cambridge, Somerville, Randolph, Everett, Chelsea, and Milton, all the mayors and town managers, for being strident in enforcing these stay-at-homes. Again, we are having to sort of figure this out as we go because the scale and scope of the hurt that this pandemic has caused, both from a public health standpoint and an economic one, is completely unprecedented. We really don't have a stabilizing sort of reference or analog to refer to.
Yeah. Congressman, I was just wondering also your thoughts on, in particular, the equity decisions that are currently being contemplated, right? It is no secret that the Black and Latino community in particular is being severely affected. We both share in some of the bad things that are making us more at risk, like living in dense areas, having jobs which are not necessarily conducive to working from home, lack of access to healthcare and capital, and chronic illnesses, right? What do we envision as a potential strategy on a go-forward basis to create more equity in the process?
Well, let me get to that in a moment, JC, but I will say in the long term, in terms of economic recovery and really just our integrity as a nation, we cannot return to the status quo and normal. When people say they can't wait until this pandemic is behind us so that we can return to normal, I don't want to return to a normal where people have unequal access to healthcare. I don't want to return to a normal where the comorbidities and the impacts of structural racism resulting in higher asthma rates and higher diabetes and heart disease and all of these things based on environmental injustices and subpar housing and the greatest illness of greed. You know, we can't return to that normal. And so I hope that what people will be committed to is dismantling structural racism and centering equity in all of our decisions and understanding the intersectionality of racial justice, of economic justice, of climate justice, of housing justice, of healthcare justice. There is an intersectionality in all these things. So that's for the long term. In the immediate, early on, I began banging the drum and pushing the Health and Human Services Secretary Azar, to collect racial data. We were already collecting age and gender. I pushed for a collection of racial and ethnicity data in real time, disaggregated, publicly reported, so that we could learn whether or not access to testing and treatment was equitable, but also so that we could identify trends, hotspots, and then allow the data to inform where our investments go. One of the things we were able to change in this last package, the CARES Part 2, is that there was an algorithm where medical equipment and supplies were distributed according to population and not infection rates. And that was something we were able to change. So the first I lobbied with a letter, then we introduced legislation. That legislation was adopted wholesale into the last package. And so even though we know anecdotally that Black and Brown communities would be hardest hit, we need the data to save lives. And so now you see that we're getting ahead of this a little bit, which is where we need to be, JC.
Yeah.
We're in the unenviable position of being behind because of the science denials and the criminal negligence and the sluggish response of this administration. And behind is the last place you want to be in a pandemic. So we need the data to get ahead of it. So that we can do things like contact tracing, have mobile units, antibody testing, and then a big one before I move on to the equitable economic response, JC, is in a community, we see the hardest hit communities like in Boston or Roxbury, Hyde Park, Mattapan. Throughout my district, we see Chelsea, Randolph, right? These are, Everett is now starting to trend that way. Yeah. And we have to just get ahead of this. And so the legislation that was included in the last package that I wrote marries $1 billion in resources so that we can begin to get ahead of this in some way. So again, now the resources will go to where the highest infection rates are, and that will get us on path to having a more equitable response. It's not data mining for data mining, it's data mining to save lives. On the economic side,
before you move on there, on the issue of the data, right? Because it was mind-boggling to me that each state is capturing the data using a different methodology, right? So, and some states are a different state than others, right? So this was front and center in New York City when Governor Cuomo, identifies part of his data as results that the Latino community was being hardest hit, right? Same thing happened in Chicago and New Orleans with the African-American community, right? So as part of the legislation being considered or the regulatory changes being considered, is it going to be, there going to be, standards for data measurement? Is that on the table?
Absolutely. So just to be clear, when I first started this advocacy in mid-March, there were some states that were collecting some semblance of data, about 30, but they were mostly focused on age and gender. And when they released that data publicly, we were seeing early on that men were being hardest hit, were being harder hit by COVID-19. Now overlaying that with the racial data, there were like 3 states that were doing that: Massachusetts, Michigan, and Louisiana. And so here in Boston, where African Americans make up 25% of the population, but we're representing 40% of the positive COVID-19 cases. And so again, and then we see what has happened in Chelsea, a predominantly Latinx community. And again, there's the overlay of the fact that many Black and brown people are frontline workers. So the essential workers are dominantly represented by African American and Latinx communities. So there's also continues to be a higher rate of exposure. And then on top of that, this is the point that I forgot to make earlier, is that if you look at, I talked to a family in Chelsea, there's 12 people in one apartment. So someone was presenting with symptoms, but they could not physically distance in that apartment with a family of 12. And so now with those resources, we're able to set that person up somewhere else on a college campus, at a hotel, someplace where they can actually self-quarantine. So I do believe the $1 billion that was attached to the legislation, that will, now that's federally mandated, it's standardized, so it won't be ad hoc. And that $1 billion will allow states to develop those standards and those protocols, and then also to marry the data with the resources.
Great. The state has been releasing town by town statistics. And as of, I think, 3 days ago, maybe it was last Friday, the statewide average was 600 positive cases per 100,000, right? And then you go to a place like Chelsea, which was at 4,000 cases per 100,000, and Lawrence, which I think is close to 2,000 cases.
And Randolph is third in the Commonwealth, third in the state.
Yeah. So clearly it's an issue. I'm really glad to hear that it's something that's, this whole issue of data. Before I forget, Jen mentioned that we were being broadcast live by El Mundo, right? And I just want to let you know that they have about 50,000 followers, so they are listening to this. So
I'm grateful for that. We want to I'm grateful for that. We want to get the information out. And so to that point, also, I continue to fight for, and we were successful in securing more money for our community health centers. In the Massachusetts 7th, 1 in 3 of my constituents get their health care from a healthcare center. They serve our most vulnerable, our undocumented, our uninsured, our seniors, low-income communities. So we can't talk about a healthcare response and not prioritize community health centers. Now, for the equity when it comes to the economic recovery, in the same way that I push for data collection in the public health response, myself, Senator Kamala Harris, Representative Gregory Meeks, we're pushing for that same transparency in lending. Because the thing is that we're fighting for the funds, but if the feds don't give the lenders any guidance to enforce fair lending laws, if they're not providing us any transparency in real time about who they're lending to, again, we know anecdotally what is likely to happen, but we need the data in real time so that we can course correct in real time. So what I'm fighting for when it comes to an equitable economic recovery is dedicated funds for minority business enterprises and more grants, not loans, okay? More grants. So dedicated funds for minority business enterprises to support those businesses that are too small to fail, bodegas, restaurants, beauty salons, barbershops, more grants, not loans, transparency in lending, and then the enforcement of fair lending laws.
Correct. I mean, there's been a lot of negative media around, the big companies that took advantage of the PPP, and some of them are returning them. And, today it was announced that if you were the recipient of north of $2 million in PPP funds, in fact, it will get audited, which I think is a great thing. On the whole issue around equity, a big shout out to the Foundation for Business Equity, which has launched a program called the PPP Equity Program to help minority-owned businesses get access to SBA lenders. Some of the SBA lenders were prioritizing the loans in order of size, and in doing so, inevitably leaving small businesses in the queue. And right now, everyone is aware that we're playing a little bit of games of musical chairs. When the funding is over sometime this week, some folks will get it and some folks won't. So
that's right. JC, to that point, I mean, again, we can fight for the massive federal investments, but my grandmother used to say, God and the devil are in the details. So ultimately it comes down to implementation. And what's been really frustrating is that the feds keep changing the guidance. And so that makes lenders very insecure about lending. And then they've created a lot of interim rules. So for example, if you suffered a loss on your taxes, you're ineligible. If you have a criminal record, you're ineligible. I actually know many small business owners, 1 in 3 Americans have some sort of a criminal record. I know many small business owners who own restaurants and barbershops who have a criminal record. They're ineligible. And again, our undocumented neighbors, working, contributing to our economy, contributing to our communities, needing to provide for their families. If you don't have a social security number, you've been completely left out. So I want to be transparent about the good things here, but I also want to let you know that there's so much more that needs to be done, and we're going to keep fighting for that in the 4th relief package and what might be other bills. We thought we were going to be returning to, I just got back from Washington because we just voted on the CARES Act 2. And I thought I was going to be returning to Washington on Monday for 2 weeks. And the healthcare experts advised our House leadership that we should not be returning because there just aren't the protocols in place. So one of the things that I'm really pushing for is that we have the capacity to vote remotely, supporting those pushes for us to be able to conduct our committee work, our caucus work, to vote and to do it remotely, because we know that we need to get more relief to you quickly.
Yeah. I've been following you since your Boston City Council days, a big fan. And, maybe I was moving on to a different line of question around your district in particular. What are those issues that you see in your district that are unique to those constituents? To the extent that there are any, and trust me, when you're in the middle of an economic phase, I think they're pretty similar.
The Massachusetts 7th is such a vibrant, diverse and dynamic district. It is also one of the most unequal in the country. And all the data supports that. That is, why I ran for Congress, because the fact that in a 3-mile radius from Roxbury to the Back Bay, life expectancy, or from Cambridge to Dudley, life expectancy drops by 30 years and median household income by $50,000. So these inequities and disparities that persist and are deeply embedded in the Massachusetts 7th, they existed long before the current administration. I'll acknowledge that those inequities have certainly been exacerbated and worsened under this administration, and certainly in the midst of COVID-19. And so what do people talk to me the most about? Writ large, not just exclusively small business owners, food insecurity.
Yeah.
That is major. Rent is due in 3 days. People have tremendous anxiety about that. And so that's why I continue to push both for rent and mortgage cancellation. And that's true not only residentially, but for our commercial businesses as well. I think it's really important that we're canceling those debts, including student debt, so that we're focused on getting as much money when the economy is back up and running in the hands of people, so that they're not worried about paying a bill, but that they're doing other things to jumpstart the economy and to sustain, to provide for their families. Housing is your most expensive bill.
Yeah.
So that's the thing that I hear the most about is people, and our state legislature and our governor has shown great leadership on that when it comes to rent and mortgage relief. I'm looking at some states like Michigan where they're still doing utility shutoffs. Can you imagine? So how can you talk about you need to wash your hands vigorously in order to stay safe and healthy, and you're turning off people's water because they owe money? So those are the things that I hear the most about is food insecurity, housing insecurity, and then also the number of people that call me that are just in jobs where they don't have the PPE that they need. They are essential workers, but they feel unsafe. They're worried about compromising their families, or they're working sick. I received a call from a mother at 11 o'clock at night, and she said, I'm an essential worker. I don't feel well. The schools are closed. There's no one to care for my child. I'm a single mom. Representative Pressley, can you assure me that if I stay home with my child because I don't feel well and I have no one else to watch my child, that I'll still have a job? And I couldn't promise her that. Yeah. And that's exactly why we need paid sick leave.
Yeah. On the issue of essential workers in particular, obviously we have heroes in hospitals and nursing homes right now, but essential workers also include first responders. And when I think of first responders, a lot of people think about firemen and policemen, right, which are great. I also include those that are helping you at the grocery store, right? And I heard, of a supermarket store in Chelsea that have 25% of their workforce is actually being diagnosed positive. And frankly, they're still open and they're still going because people have to eat, right? And so, on the issue of essential workers, what type of protections are likely to manifest themselves? PTO is a big one, right? Um,
Yeah.
but at some point we
Well,
have.
but I think so. It's not only so, and I agree with you, JC. And we're working hard. I know I am, to diversify the narrative of who is a defined essential worker. For me, that's everyone from our letter carriers to grocery store clerks to our custodians, to our bus drivers, to our transit workers, it's everyone that's keeping us going. And they have put themselves in harm's way because they are, it's those that are taking care of the developmentally disabled. It's home care aides. Yesterday I was talking to bank workers, and that's not an essential workforce that I would have considered. But of course, they're having to play a role in the recovery and getting people the resources they need to recover economically. And I hadn't considered, do our bank workers have PPE? Do they feel safe? So the definition of essential worker is diverse and very broad. And so the essential Workers' Bill of Rights that myself and Senator Warren and Representative Ro Khanna and Representative Deb Haaland that we introduced yesterday speaks to that. It's everything from PPE to hazard pay, to paid sick leave, to paid family leave, because let's not forget, people also have, since so many people are being told if you have symptoms to stay home, people are being caregivers. So that's the other thing. So we need paid sick leave, we need paid family leave, we need hazard pay, and essential workers need PPE.
Yeah, I know. So folks, I ask around the community all the time, the general question of how you're doing, right? And the three things that people want to know, which we regretfully don't know, is when is it going to be over, right? And no one knows that, right? When can we restart the economy, right? Which we could get into that, right? And others have began that process in other parts of the world, and everyone understands that there's some risks that go into that, and that we could go into a period of expansion and contraction for the next 18 to 24 months, right? But those are the questions that, once you have food on the table and a roof above your head, right?
That's right.
Two things that people fear the most, which is when can we go back to some semblance of normalcy, and it will not be normal again, right?
Yeah.
And at what speed and at which stage, and what makes sense in a way that it's good both for protecting lives and trying to get a semblance of economic recovery going, right? We're going to open it up from questions from the crowd. We have literally thousands of people listening in from El Mundo and about 110 participants from the ABL family. Here's one that's coming in, and I quote, in the next legislation, could the SBA has a set aside for minority-owned businesses? The SBA has run the 8A set-aside program for minority vendors to the federal government. Is this being considered by Congress?
Well, it's being fought for and advocated for by me, and others who understand the real need. And so, yes, that is certainly something that they could do. And again, we need their cooperation. The fact that it was first come, first serve, the fact that the big banks were really prioritizing their most valued customers, which is usually your most wealthy customers, those that you already have existing accounts with, put, all true small businesses, all micro businesses, and especially MBEs and WBEs at a disadvantage because of these structural challenges historically that have existed. And I just can't emphasize enough. It's like the infrastructure is so important, JC, because you never want equity to be left to the benevolence of who's in charge. It can't be left to the whims and the benevolence of folks. As a good friend reminds me all the time, racial justice is not charity. Economic justice is not charity, it's strategy. Correct. Our business community is not thriving. Our economy is not thriving if every sector of our business community is not thriving. And that has to mean that we are prioritizing and have dedicated, and again, what I'm fighting for are grants, not loans, because although there are ways in which these loans can be forgivable, by and large, that will not be the case. And so more grants, dedicated funding, and JC, might I also add, and I'm happy to unpack it a little bit more if there's time, people have to also get that our nonprofit institutions and our faith-based institutions are all going through the same portal, along with our micro businesses and our micro MBEs and WBEs. That is unprecedented. And that was a concern that myself and others expressed from the outset in terms of implementation. Our nonprofits and our faith-based institutions have always been ineligible for this sort of support through the SBA. And so there's a learning curve, which is why we appreciate this consortium and collaborative that has been created to provide that technical assistance to walk people through. And so just from a capacity standpoint, who's shocked that the system broke down? It's not only the devastating impact on our small businesses that are in need and crying out for relief. It's also our nonprofits and our faith-based institutions who are all going through the same portal.
Great. This next question came out from folks on the phone. Is there, and it touches me in a special point, because as a Latino professional in Massachusetts, there's about 1 million of us in the state right now, right? And a lot of them are not documented, right? Is there a viable path at the federal level to provide relief to undocumented immigrants? What role do business leaders play in helping with this advocacy?
I don't know where to begin with that, JC, because I need you to know that it's not that this Democratic majority Congress does not value or recognize the contributions and the needs of our undocumented neighbors. Honestly, and this is uncomfortable for me to be saying in the midst of a pandemic, because you don't want to, be partisan in this way. But there's no way around it. This is a xenophobic administration. They, when it comes to their policies, the cruelty is the point. Why else would you, in the midst of a pandemic, say that we're going to exclude people when the hurt is being felt by everyone? So the relief should be felt by everyone. Why would you deny people who are contributing to our tax base, to our economy, to our communities, who need to provide for their families? It's just indefensible and unjust. And I'll continue to, along with my colleagues, fight for our undocumented neighbors to have these same relief mechanisms when it comes to the public health response, and also when it comes to the economic recovery. But it has not happened to date, but we will keep fighting. When you ask what's the viable path,
or is there one? There regretfully there might not be, right? So that's the issue, right? So
yeah, but you know what though? But I've never taken on a fight because the horizon seemed optimistic.
Correct.
We're going to take on these fights because folks are worth it and they deserve it, and we'll keep taking that on. But the fact that most families are mixed immigration status, and so you saw some of the stories where our dreamers, DACA recipients, had a social security number applied, and then were told they weren't eligible for relief because they're in a mixed immigration status family. I mean, so they just sow seeds of cruelty to say, well, if you're connected to anyone that we consider to be quote unquote illegal, we don't want them benefiting in any way. For the public charge rule to be going on, that we're going to deny people access to food because of immigration status. People should not be denied access to healthcare, to economic recovery, to food, to any relief, to any protections based on immigration status. So we'll just continue to fight. And what can you do? Continue to raise your voices. The one thing, I know I've spoken with our governor about this, and again, it's all about implementation. And so, we've been trying to figure out, are there ways that the state can step outside the guidance and the guidelines that the feds have offered? But it's very tricky because what they'll do is penalize you and take money back if you don't stay within the guidance and the guidelines offered in terms of eligibility.
Yeah, great. We have a lot of questions coming in. People are very interested in your thoughts. The next question comes, it says, Congresswoman, thank you for your leadership. You have been integral in protecting renters from eviction and hardship during the pandemic. What might be done next, though, to assist property owners and landlords as rent payments decline? So basically the other side of the equation.
Yeah, no, actually, I'm committed to both because, if you live in a 2-family and you need that rent and it's going towards your mortgage, again, there's sort of collateral impact and consequences in all of this. And so I do believe that there should be a rent cancellation. There should be mortgage cancellation more than relief, because if you say we're just suspending payments when this is quote unquote over, whenever that is, people will then have a big balloon payment they owe, and they're playing catch up, on their job and that sort of thing. So I really do think for as long as we're in this, it should be canceled. And I feel that way not only on the residential side, but I feel that way on the commercial side, because the last thing we want is to have more empty storefronts and to have blight on community. When we need to be focused on how we recover, do it equitably, and also usher in a new paradigm and a new normal of how we're going to move. We don't want that kind of blight, and we don't want anyone fearing displacement. So there also needs to be a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. So rent cancellation, mortgage cancellation, a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. These are priorities that I'm taking into the next the fourth relief package. I've actually introduced legislation with Representative Omar specific to rent cancellation. And again, because none of these things happen in a silo, also pushing for student debt cancellation. I was able to get one victory in the student debt side in the first CARES, which was payments were interrupted, they were paused. And we stopped the involuntary garnishment of wages and benefits. Because believe it or not, there are senior citizens whose benefits have been garnished because they still owe student debt. Yeah. And so we were able to stop the garnishment of wages and benefits and to have payments temporarily paused. But what we need is student debt cancellation. Again, 855,000 federal borrowers in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Folks need that relief. And we need reoccurring payments. If you think about this, JC, again, I don't mean to be partisan, but it's tough. If they weren't focused on bailing out corporations without any oversight, no guardrails, right? We could have given people, some of the projections are anywhere from $8,000 to $13,000 instead of a one-time rebate of $1,200 to $2,400. $8,000 to $13,000. So we need more reoccurring payments. And we have a bill that we're supporting that proposes $2,000 a month per person per month until we're out of this.
Yeah, which is similar to what Canada is doing, I believe. Our next question, it was actually a little bit more focused on the innovation economy in Massachusetts. It has to do with renewable energy, right? The question goes, many of us in the renewable energy field are of the belief that we need to build our way out to recovery. What are you all on the financial services community thinking about promoting infra investments, loan guarantees, et cetera, and ensuring equity in the process? In other words, how are we thinking of supporting the renewable energy sector as an innovation economy type of job, which would create jobs in and of itself, right? It's pretty specialized renewable energy. So if you have no comment on that, I will totally get it.
You know what? I would love to circle back on that. Actually, I just want to confer with my staff a little bit, because the conversations that we've had most recently in FSC have not yet addressed that. So I'd be curious as to, their thoughts and their recommendations. I also did just want to make the point, JC, that I was remiss in doing when it comes to the rent suspension, that there will be a direct assistance fund to support landlords to replace their lost income. So I just thought it was important to underscore that.
Yeah.
And I'll have to just, circle back. I know that on the renewable energy front, the only thing that I could add is that the fourth bill, again, since it will be focused on infrastructure, we are pushing for a national infrastructure bank. That's a priority of our chair, Maxine Waters, and perhaps that can help to finance those projects.
Yeah. The next one, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I think it's more of a theoretical discussion, right? The future of healthcare, right? So, we started with Obamacare that went through some changes. Now the health crisis is upon us, right? Things that are moving rapidly towards telehealth. There's a belief that pandemics will be periodic and more often in the future, right? As you think through healthcare and the healthcare future, where do you think this is heading?
Universal healthcare. I mean, if this doesn't make the case for it, that you can't have healthcare tied to employment, if that's not clear in this pandemic, then I don't know.
What else would be exactly right?
What else could make the argument for you? And then I can't, underscore our community health centers enough. They have for too long been overutilized and under-resourced. Again, 1 in 3 people in my district receive their health care from a community health center. Millions of low-income people, I think it's like 23 million or something like that, receive their care from a community health center. I think I just got that stat wrong, but my staff will correct me in the G chat here. But
30 million.
If we want to address these health disparities, so again, we can't run from the comorbidities of unequal access to healthcare, which is why we need universal healthcare, which is why we need to continue to support our community health centers, and the comorbidity of structural racism. So who's shocked that Chelsea, which has some of the highest asthma rates in the state because of the brunt of environmental injustices that they bear, represent such high infection rates? And this was a respiratory illness. I mean, no advocate, no one who's on the ground and doing the work of dismantling structural racism is surprised that Black and Latinx communities have been hardest hit. And it's because of the comorbidities of structural racism. If you are living in subpar housing, you're gonna, be more likely to have asthma. If you live in a food desert, and you live in a food desert because you live in a transportation desert, and all those things overlay, you're gonna have a higher incident and representation of these other health disparities. Diabetes, heart disease. So we have to be very intersectional in our response going forward. And, when I first started talking about the need to collect racial data, there were some people that said, why are you racializing a pandemic? Clearly the virus does not discriminate. Anyone can get the virus, but the data has bore out our worst assumptions, which is that Black and Latinx communities would be hardest hit because they're more susceptible based on the comorbidities of these underlying conditions and health disparities. And when we do contract it, we suffer the most severe consequences. That is a fact. So we need to be committed to addressing health disparities in a real way. And to me, one of the key ways to do that is to support our health centers, who are right now funded on a year-to-year cycle. And so that's one of the things I started fighting for early on, which was that they have a more predictable funding cycle for up to like 5 years.
Yeah. We only have time for a few more questions. Again, we're really appreciative of your time. On the issue of healthcare, which I think everyone is passionate about, you certainly hope that the shift towards telehealth eventually will lower some of the...
Oh, yes. Oh my gosh, JC, thank you. I almost missed to say that. Thank you. Yeah.
I hope that, and not just in the healthcare industry, even in the learning industry, e-learning, right? You would think that you would expect to see some seismic shifts in how we operate the delivery of education, right? One more question here, that's coming out of...
JC, to that point, I do want to say that because I do speak to the president and CEOs of our hospitals and community health centers all day, every day. Telemedicine has been a lifesaver in that way. The other reason why telemedicine has been very impactful is because we see a spike in mental health challenges. And so, this is also something that we're going to have to address in the recovery, the trauma of all of this.
Yeah. Moving on to the recovery, right? You mentioned infrastructure in the next round. If you had your choice, right, what would be the headline of the infrastructure bill if you were Chairperson Pelosi?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Well, the headline would read, our bill that Chairwoman Waters authored and that we reported out of the Financial Services Committee, but haven't been able to bring to the floor for a vote yet. And that is that housing is infrastructure. Again, we have to define infrastructure as more than just roads and bridges. We've got to prioritize those multimodal investments, understand that our current infrastructure federal funding formula only pays for roads and bridges and the expansion of highways. It doesn't take care of maintenance, right? And I formed the Future Transportation Caucus to center equity, accessibility, sustainability, and connectivity in every infrastructure decision. So I want to see the goals of the Future Transportation Caucus realized in any infrastructure package. I would like for housing to be included. I would like for water to be included, and certainly broadband. We didn't touch on education here, but that achievement gap is widening. There are some lessons positively to learn about online learning, and in some ways it will make the learning experience more accessible to many. But again, our most vulnerable, many of our first generation students and those that disproportionately suffer from the achievement gap, they're struggling because they can't have that community, that communal, that in-person connection. But we do have to acknowledge that this has really highlighted how big the digital divide still is. So infrastructure, housing, water, broadband, and then multimodal investments.
Great. So the ABL is a business association. We live by the motto, do good and do well. If Jessie was here, she would be chanting to that.
Thank you for bringing up Jessie. I didn't want to be too biased.
As a business community, we live in a world of conflicting priorities, the conflict of doing good for our staff, doing good for our shareholders, doing good for the community, right? But as a business community, in that world of conflicting priorities, if you have to focus on one single topic to double down and really advocate for, would that be transportation, healthcare, housing, infrastructure? And I'm just curious.
The business community?
Because this is all important, right? Yes, in terms of advocacy.
I'm not going to choose. I think that's the problem, is that we have perpetuated this cultural acceptable norm of these false binary choices.
Yeah.
And, are you pro-business or pro-community? I just reject all of that. What we need is to be intersectional in all of these approaches and to be true partners and to center equity and racial justice in every single part of it.
Great.
So you said, what is the motto? Do good, do well?
Do good and do well. You can do good and do well.
Okay, so I'm going to amend it. And I think, Jen, you'll give me this license. And I think Jessie would give me this license, Sean Curran and others. Do good, do well, and do it all.
Great. Any closing remarks from your end around, how this community can help each other, how we can help you? We're ready to wrap up, but I want to get your closing thoughts.
No, just, this is an unprecedented crisis, and it demands of all of us unprecedented community and unprecedented hope. We have to keep that. So I just thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you for your leadership. It's been wonderful to be in virtual community with all of you. And I hope that you will continue to be in touch with my office and or we'll be lifting your questions. Excuse me. I have asthma, and that's what that is. But just stay in touch because, you know, as I said during my run, the people closest to the pain should be closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. And so I'm only as good as my connectedness to the people. And you are all closest to the pain, but you're also closest to the solution. And so let's just continue this partnership. And this certainly isn't a one-off conversation. And thank you, ABL. Thank you, Jen. Thank you, JC. Thank you, everyone.
It's been great to have you here on behalf of the ABL community and for me personally to have this great chat with you. For those of you that are following us at El Mundo, I thank you, Alberto Basayo and El Mundo, for sharing this discussion with the Latino community. We hope that you guys consider joining the ABL. Congresswoman Pressley, again, an honor for you to be here. Thank you so much for your time. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Yes, everyone stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
You're live, Alberto.
Thank you so much for your time. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Yes, everyone stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Ok. Ahí lo escucharon. Nuestro gran amigo Juan Carlos Morales, para los que estaban viendo.
You're live, Alberto.
Yes, I know. I'm on the air, right? Yes, sir. Ok, gracias, Michael. Para las personas que
Thank you
estaban...
so much for your time. Stay safe and stay healthy.
Yes, everyone stay safe and healthy. Thank you.
All right.
You still have the audio on for the broadcast.
Okay, all right. Let me see. Ahí lo escucharon. There we go.
There you go.
There we go, my friend. Ok. Para los que estaban viendo a través del Mundo Boston, quiero agradecerle a The Alliance for Business Leadership. I want to thank The Alliance for Business Leadership. Esto fue un webinar que hicieron con nuestro amigo Juan Carlos Morales de Surfside Capital Advisor, amigo de la comunidad. Una conversación con la congresista Ayanna Pressley. Como ustedes saben, la congresista Ayanna Pressley fue la primera afroamericana en representar a Massachusetts en el Congreso, una amiga de la comunidad, una amiga del Mundo Boston. Una sesión de 1 hora. Quiero resumirle un poco los highlights de lo que hablaron Juan Carlos Morales con Ayanna Pressley. Ayanna se mantiene fiel, vamos a decir, fiel apoyadora de nuestra comunidad. Dice que va a continuar a pelear a nivel federal para los recursos que necesita nuestra comunidad. Específicamente, algunos puntos habló de los fondos federales que se le han dedicado para los pequeños comerciantes. Han habido mucha controversia con este PPP, el Payroll Protection Plan, el plan. Como ustedes saben, los $350 millones que salieron para los pequeños comerciantes, no es que se desaparecieron, pero no llegaron a todos los pequeños comerciantes. Muchos pequeños comerciantes se quedaron esperando. Sabemos la controversia que muchas compañías grandes que ahora tienen que devolver los dineros fueron los primeros en coger ese dinero. O sea, compañías pequeñas pero grandes, casi cadenas. El Congreso está considerando otros 250 millones, pero la congresista Pressley dice que ella quiere y está trabajando en apartar una de esas cantidades para los pequeños comerciantes minoritarios, o sea, prácticamente dividido por raza o por raza, diciendo de que no dijo que el sistema ha sido racista, pero que a través de los años los bancos, las personas que están encargadas de esto no tienen relaciones con los pequeños comerciantes, o los pequeños comerciantes no tienen relaciones mucho con los bancos, o sea, que nos ha puesto un poco difícil para conseguir estos fondos, y ella, una de las cosas que ella está peleando es para eso. También ella habló de que ella piensa de que nosotros debemos de considerar no solamente un alivio para los que alquilan casa, pero básicamente cancelar o suspender cualquier pago de alquiler, no de posponerlo. O sea, porque lo que está pasando ahora lo están diciendo que no lo tienen que pagar ahora, pero quizás al final. Es decir, suspender o eliminar, cancelar esa deuda para los que pagan alquiler y para los que tienen que pagar hipoteca también. Ella está considerando quiero pelear un fondo para los dueños de casa que están perdiendo su ingreso también, porque los dueños de casa tienen que también pagar su hipoteca, tienen gastos también, y si no se le paga el alquiler, ellos no tienen ingreso tampoco. O sea que fue una conversación muy interesante que se la queríamos compartir con ustedes, aunque no fue en el español. La congresista Ayanna Pressley no habla español. Juan Carlos, como le dije, es puertorriqueño, amigo, pero esto fue que The Alliance for Business Leadership tenía este evento con sus miembros tenían más de 100 personas viendo y nos dieron la opción o el derecho de poder presentárselo a ustedes, aunque era en inglés. Pensábamos que era de importancia ustedes escuchar y ver a la congresista Pressley. Gracias, buen trabajo, Juan Carlos Morales. Por eso no se hizo en español, porque en realidad no era nuestro evento, era el evento de la Alliance for Business Leadership, que es una coalición compuesta por empresarios y líderes de negocio con una convicción en común. Ellos piensan que la responsabilidad social y el crecimiento de la economía de Massachusetts están conectados mano a mano. That is the Alliance for Business Leadership, which is a coalition of business leaders with one belief in common, that social responsibility and the sustainable growth of the Massachusetts economy go hand in hand. We also heard from the president, Jen Benson, of that organization. So thank you for giving us the opportunity to put it live in Mundo, Boston. We knew it wasn't going to be in Spanish, but we wanted to give an opportunity. We kind of translated some of the bullet points. Thank you to Juan Carlos Morales from Surfside Capital Advisors. Okay, that's it for this session. We interrupt your regular broadcasting. Was that what they said, how they used to say it, Michael?
Yes, that's how they used to say it. Well, we're returning to our regular broadcasting, right?
Yeah, we're returning to our regular broadcasting. So, anyways, gracias a ustedes. Nada, hasta mañana. Tendremos más información sobre lo que está pasando con coronavirus aquí en Massachusetts, en Boston y el estado. Esta noche la ciudad de Lawrence tiene una decisión muy importante. Los concejales discutirán un toque de queda quizás más severo que el de Boston en Lawrence. Hasta pronto, se despide Alberto Vasallo y Michael Sotos of Performer.com. Don't miss the shows, the great entertainment on Performer.com. If you love the fun stuff El Mundo does, you're going to love the stuff Performer.com does as well. Head over there. They have great guests, great shows in English, in Spanish, and music and everything. Right, Michael?
That's correct. We'll be back tonight right here, too, at 7 o'clock. Not here. For Performer. Right, on Alberto and Friends. That's tonight at 7. Yes. All right. Good night. Good day, folks. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.